Okay. Good morning, boys and girls, members of the eighth grade class. This is Mr. Murray coming to you from Akron Akron Middle School, rather. I'm doing a complete live event. Hey, I see Raquel's here. Woo. Good, we got somebody. Hope you're enjoying your slate vacation from school. Okay, so I don't think you guys can talk out loud to me, but I think you guys can type. So if you have a question. Oh, I see you said hi. Hi, and good job being first. Have you read any more of Mockingbird, Raquel? By chance? I uploaded them on Google Classrooms. I can give you the password to the Google Classrooms if you need it. Okay, I will give you the password. Give me 1 sec here, and I will load it up. In the meantime, I'll just tell you what I put on. Hey, Carmelo, this one's actually for 8th grade, but you can, be here too. The 7th grade one's going to be at 11:30, but you're welcome to come here also. Hey, Madison, good to see you too. Have any of you guys gone on to Google Classrooms yet to see the content I put on there? By chance? Carmelo or Madison, have either of you? All right, cool. All right, so I guess what I'm going to do now is I'm going to review chapter 11 of To Kill a Mockingbird. Okay, I'll pull up the password and then I'll send it to you here in a second. I'm trying to do that on my phone while I talk to you guys. I think if I log out of Miss Vaughn's account on YouTube, though, I won't be able to get back. So, okay, that's fine. I'll give it to you. So what we're going to do now, we're just going to go over To Kill a Mockingbird, Chapter 11. So Madison and Carmelo, you're welcome to stick around, even though you're not reading this yet. But Raquel, this will be geared more towards you. So let me move my handy-dandy camera. All right, so what's that backwards? Oh, I made it backwards. Okay, so I'll just, I don't especially know how to use YouTube yet. It's the first time. So the main question for chapter 11 is, are most people basically good? So Raquel, why don't you type in a response to that? And Madison, Carmelo, since you're here, you can type that in too, because there's a lot of overlap between To Kill a Mockingbird's themes and the themes of Anne Frank. So you're kind of reading books that have a lot of overlap. The question is, are most people basically good? So in To Kill a Mockingbird, there's a lot of racism, and in Anne Frank, there's a lot of anti-Semitism. Okay, so you said no. Why do you think that most people aren't basically good? Okay, so no seems to be fairly popular, and that's my answer. Okay, so one of the main aspects of both, Miss Yangling. So one of the aspects of both To Kill a Mockingbird and Anne Frank is this idea that most people are basically good, but when placed in a difficult situation, the bad tends to come out. So in okay, so Madison made a good point. A lot of people have disagreements with people, which cause trouble, and I think that's the one of the key things to Anne Frank, where they're forced to live in this small area, and being forced to live in this small area brings out a lot of the bad in the people. The Van Dams argue a lot over petty things. Mr. Dussel's happy to be saved, but then after just a few days, he starts becoming very petty and intolerant towards Anne. And then back to Kill a Mockingbird for Raquel, you also have the notion that the people living in the small town basically got along fairly well. But once this trial came down the pipes and someone got accused, a black man got accused of raping a white woman, all of a sudden the racism comes out. So while Atticus is trying to teach his children that most people are basically decent and how to do the right thing, they're confronted by all of this racism, and Atticus is trying to basically teach his children not to believe something that almost everyone around them does believe. Yeah, and Madison just made a good point that Dussel was selfish and he showed his true colors. So kind of the idea that the bad situation brings out the worst in him. But remember, when he first came, how he behaved and how he mentioned when he, this is going back to Anne Frank, when Dussel first showed up, he mentioned that he had lots of children patients as a dentist. And he had a lot of these children as patients because he was actually pretty personable and patient with young people. So a lot of parents trusted him with their children. So in a good situation, he had a lot of good qualities. It's just in a bad situation, a lot of that negative comes out. And I think you can even look at our world right now. You guys can type in your reply to this, but think about the world right now. So we're in a kind of a bad situation and people start hoarding things. So you have people hoarding toilet paper, milk, even irrational things like milk, which goes bad, and milk's gross anyways. Thanks, I like this shirt. It's probably my favorite shirt. I've had it for a long time. But what do you guys think about that right now? You have people hoarding things. Some of the things don't even stay good for long periods of time. You could keep toilet paper forever, but milk will go bad, eggs will go bad, and you still have people hoarding those. Yeah, I'm sorry you guys had to see that. So a bad situation, like we were saying, brings out the bad in people, right? And you can relate that to the Anne Frank story because they're stuck in that house and they have, I think, three people's worth of rations for 8 people. And the rations aren't even providing a lot of food anyway, so they're all hungry. Madison and Carmelo, you guys are on Act 3, right? You guys haven't read Act 4 yet, I'm taking it? Let's take that as a no. So what I did, at the end of this, I'll link the Google Classroom link to it. 7th grade's a little bit in a better position because for 7th grade, you can actually watch the entire play. There's also a audiobook version, so you can listen to someone reading it. And if you want, you can read it. I attached the PDF also on Google Classroom. And then I attached some quizzes. So once you read, listen to, or watch the play, you can answer those quizzes, and then I'll be able to grade it and send it right back to you. And that you can do it all in the Google Classrooms. So 7th grade's a little bit better spot because the reading, the play, and the audiobook are all the exact same. 8th grade, so Raquel, you have a little bit harder. I have the PDF of the story, and I have YouTube of someone reading the story, but I don't have the movie. If you have Amazon, you can watch it, and I think Hulu you can watch it on, but not Netflix and not on YouTube. So you have to actually have one of those, or you're just going to have to bite the bullet and read it or listen to it on audiobooks, whichever you prefer. So since I have 2 different grades on here, why don't we do a quick comparison and contrast on some of the characters? So the protagonist in the 7th grade story, you have Mr. Frank. He's basically the good guy, the moral compass, the person who Anne looks up to the most. And in 8th grade, Raquel, you have Atticus, who's kind of like the moral compass. And all the characters in To Kill a Mockingbird, so far, he's probably the one you have the least information about. In terms of his personality, he's kind of just like the good guy, almost like a really generic good guy. He always does the right thing. He's not selfish. He is humble. He always sticks up for people who you wouldn't think anyone would stick up for, even like the grouchy Mr. Bose, who's mean to his kids and she's racist and she talks trash about his dead wife, but he's still nice to her. So he's kind of like a generic good guy. You get more of his personality in the next chapter, so he becomes more rounded. But right now, he's kind of like a generic good guy. And then seventh grade, you have the same thing with Mr. Frank. He always does the right thing. He takes people in without any concern for himself. He gives the best bedroom to the other people. He takes care of his daughter. When he sees that Peter isn't getting along with his father, he offers to teach him as well. So you have like these two just like moral compasses who are better than the people around them, who kind of elevate how good they are based on how negative everyone else becomes, right? And you can look at that in really, like, again, you can look just right to right now in the world. Like, so there are people trying to do the right thing and trying to help others. I saw something yesterday where someone was trying to donate a bunch of Purell. Construction people in construction companies were donating their masks to people in the medical industry. So you have people doing decent things. But then on the news, a lot of times you're going to see people, and unfortunately, when you guys went to the store, you saw people fighting over food, fighting over water, and just like kind of acting out of fear, and the worst parts of them are coming out. But anyway, so in both stories, you have a young girl who's kind of seeing the world. So both stories are coming of age. I know earlier in the year we went over hero's journey. So we went over how a person starts out, they go have a call to adventure, which causes them to like go out into the world. Then they meet a wise mentor. They have struggles, they fail, they eventually get up, and then they succeed and they become a better person. So in both of these stories, the hero's journey isn't going to be a physical trip. Instead, the trip is going to be more like an emotional, personal trip. So for Anne, she's stuck in this attic and she has to become an adult while she's trapped in this attic for 2 years and so many months. And for Scout, she's stuck in this town, and it's a pretty decent town for her because she's white, so she doesn't face a lot of the racism, but she does get some backlash because her father's defending a black man, and the townspeople, even though they're not too upset that he's going through the motions, they are very upset that he's trying to win. So if he was just representing Tom, there wouldn't be a problem. But because he thinks he can win and he's trying to win, there's a problem, and some of the townspeople are taking that out on the kids. So the kids have the struggle in To Kill a Mockingbird of dealing with this racism and how it's causing people to look at their family, which has always been held in high esteem, very poorly, and they get made fun of. Their dad gets made fun of. And then on the other side, for Anne Frank, she has to deal with this notion that people aren't as good as she thought they were. So not even the people who she is stuck with, she doesn't think they're as good as she had expected them to be. She's growing more distant from her sister. Her mother and her do not get along, like, whatsoever. Dussel she can't stand. The Van Dam she looks down upon Miss Van Dam because she flirts with Mr. Frank, and Mr. Van Dam because he's greedy, he's selfish. In Act 4, we find out he's stealing food. So she finds him to be very, very petty and a very negative person. But again, back to that question that we had, that most people basically good? The author of both of these stories is trying to argue that. Well, not necessarily the playwright for Anne Frank, because Anne Frank comes from a diary, but the playwright's trying to also bring this point across, that people are basically good. So you're looking at really bad situations where racism, anti-Semitism are abundant, and you guys are living through a rough situation where people are hoarding things and not acting like they're their best selves. So go back to that question, like, how do you, but this time take the opposite side. How would you prove that people are basically decent in the face of all this evidence to the contrary? So everyone's acting in a way, or most people are acting in a way that's not good. How would you, if you wanted to, try to argue that people are still basically decent? Any ideas? I'll give you a Class Dojo point if you give me a good one. I'll give you a second to type that answer out, and then I'll give you an answer if not. I assume other people will look at this later on. Okay. Yeah, the question is, even though the characters in both of the stories are acting in very cruel and selfish ways, if you wanted to prove that people were basically good, how would you prove that? Like, what evidence would you give to show that people are basically decent, even though there's all this evidence to the contrary? So I basically want you to take the opposite side to what you all think and what you've seen and what you've read and try to argue. Okay, that's cool. Like, so I think in both of the books, one of the main things, especially in chapter 5. Oh, I got an answer. Good. I would say that bad times people are stressed. Okay, good. That's a really good answer, and I think that's probably what the playwright Fran Frank would hope that you would take from the whole play. So even though we remember the whole dramatic irony notion that we know what's going to happen before the play starts. So we know most of these characters are going to die, yet the playwright still wants to get that idea across, that in bad times people are stressed and they don't behave the way they would normally behave in a good situation. So really good answer, Madison. Oh, I'm missing you still there, so that's good. All right. So let's examine some of the key points in chapter 11 and in Act 4. So in Act 4 of Anne Frank, we find out in the beginning of the act that Mr. Van Dam has been stealing food. The rest of the people haven't figured that out yet, but we find that out as the audience. So that's, again, some dramatic irony coming out. This idea that we know something, but the characters don't. So yeah, like, they're not thinking rationally. Good point, Madison. So in the story, like I just said, like, Mr. Van Dam's stealing food, like, one of the characters he's stealing food from is his son. So presumably the most important person in his life, he's stealing food, which is harming his son. In a normal situation, you wouldn't expect a father to steal food from his 16-year-old son, who's also going hungry and living in a bad situation. And then again, his wife, but we've kind of seen they don't get along. But at the very least, you would still expect he would try to take care of his son, yet he's actually actively hurting him, right? Also in Act 1, Scene 4, we also find out that Anne's been suffering from these night terrors, so she's been waking up in the middle of the night screaming, which is dangerous because the Nazis are looking for people in hiding. The Green Police know there are people hiding in various places, so like someone just screaming from a supposedly empty factories going to raise eyebrows. So when Anne has these night terrors, Mr. Dussel becomes very upset, very aggravated, and very impatient with her. No one really has a solution to how to make someone not have a nightmare. So the parents try to console Anne. Anne obviously doesn't want anything to do with her mother, so she goes to her father for comfort. In the beginning of class, Madison, do you remember what war that Mr. Frank fought in, by chance? We talked about a little bit. There was a YouTube video I was going to show you guys, but we didn't get there yet. Actually would have shown it right before we acted out Scene 4, because it kind of ties into why he's a little bit more patient than what a normal person might be. Oh, Carmelo, you're also here, so you can answer that also if you want to take a guess. So remember, it's World War II and the story's taking place, so it's in the 1940s by this point, and Mr. Frank is roughly 40 years old, so 20 years prior to this, what he was in, okay, so that's fine if you'll know, because again, we didn't go over it. He was in World War I, so he fought for the Germans in World War I, and he actually fought in trenches, so he's used, well, probably not used, but he was at least exposed to loud noises and bombing. So when the Allies start bombing the Nazis who live in Holland and who occupy Holland, it doesn't affect him as much because he's dealt through that already. So he's a lot more sympathetic to Anne because the fear that everyone else is feeling, he doesn't really feel it because he's used to like the bombing raids. And he's also probably assumes that the place that he's in won't get hit because he expects the Allies to just bomb military targets, which he's like partly right on that. But Mr. Frank had fought in World War One, which is kind of interesting because one of the Nazis' biggest gripes about one of the biggest gripes about Hitler against the Jewish people is that they didn't help in World War One. But Mr. Frank, this guy who's hiding from the Nazis with his family, trying to keep them safe, actually did fight for the Germans and had a pretty good record. And after the war, he was an officer, so he confiscated a horse. There was a story on the video I was going to show you guys. Where on his way to the front, the German military officers were allowed to confiscate horses from farmers. So he confiscated a horse from this farmer. I think it was in Austria. It wasn't even in Germany or France. He wasn't a German who he took the horse from. And he rode that horse, to the front lines, and he kept the horse throughout the entire war. When the war ended, and he was finally allowed to go back home, granted the Germans lost, but he was free finally. He could go home. He didn't have to fight anymore. He could spend time with his family. He still took time to go take that horse back to its owner. So, like, one of the things the Nazis bring up were that Jewish people were greedy. And in fact, like when the war ended, he could have kept the horse if he wanted. He could just let it go, but he made sure it went back to the person who confiscated it from. And it shows something about his character that he would do that. And it really goes against the whole Nazi views to how Jewish people behave, because when he had an opportunity to take something, he made sure he gave it back, even though it kept him away from his family longer than he needed to be away from them. And it helps explain why when they're in this attic, when they're in this annex, he's able to kind of keep his cool and keep his composure, even though everyone around him is having issues. So just to go back to Kill a Mockingbird, and actually this kind of goes with Anne Frank too. Another question I was going to ask you was, what is courage? I wasn't thinking ahead that it would go backwards when I wrote it down. So first time doing a YouTube video, so learning some things. So the second question I was going to ask you guys was, what is courage? So, and this applies to both classes. What do you guys think courage is? Class dojo point to whoever answers first. Actually, Carmelo, if you're still on here, the definition that is given in To Kill a Mockingbird is probably really close to something you've seen. That's an awesome answer, Madison. Be able to do something you're scared of. I like that. Yeah, like the idea that you don't have to always be brave, but you still should do the right thing even when you are afraid. So that's a really good answer. That definitely correlates to the story you guys are reading, Anne Frank, right? Because we know that Mr. Frank could have saved himself. He had that visa to Cuba, but he isn't willing to leave his family, so he stays even though he's probably deep down afraid to stay because he wants to make sure his family's safe. That's also a really good answer, Miss Yingling. The definition that's given in To Kill a Mockingbird for the 8th graders here and the 7th graders, it's a good definition also, is knowing that you've lost before you've begun, but doing it anyways because it's the right thing to do. So Carmelo, if you happen to still be on here, you can think of that towards some of the basketball games. And some of the basketball games we played, we were playing against you guys, I was coaching, you guys were playing against much older students. You guys were playing against 11th graders, senior sometimes. Some of these guys had beards bigger than mine, and just size-wise, they had you guys beat, right? But you guys still played. And not only did you guys still play, anytime I benched someone, the person I benched still wanted to go in. Spent like most of their time, instead of watching the game, complaining about how they wanted more time in the game. So if you guys were down by like 10, 15 points, The people you're playing are like 3, 4 grades older than you. They're a lot bigger than you. You guys are getting shoved around, especially in that one game. Devin broke his jaw. Jameer had blood coming down his forehead. He was going to need stitches. But you guys still wanted to keep playing, even though you were losing, and you guys kept fighting and fighting and fighting. So you kind of demonstrated this version of courage that To Kill a Mockingbird is putting forth. Like, once you were down by 20, you knew you weren't going to win anymore, but you didn't want to give up, right? And even though the people you're playing against were scary and bigger than you, you kept fighting. And you can apply that to and Frank also, because Mr. Frank, just one person, he's lost all of his money. He had to sign away the factory. He doesn't really have anything left other than his family and the few things he was able to bring to the annex with him. Yet he tries to like put forth this brave front, and he tries to teach his kid that people are basically good, even though there's all of this evidence to the contrary. Okay, I'm not sure how to make a TikTok yet, but I'll work on that later, I suppose. So I'm running out of time, so I'm going to find the code for Google Classrooms real quick. That way I can put it up so you guys can have that to use. And again, like everything that you guys would do on Google Classrooms, I can get back to you pretty quick. Now, I know you guys got a packet. Either you picked it up from the school or we delivered it in some cases, or in some cases it got mailed to you. Yeah, it's an app in the App Store. So I'm going to like pull up my my Google Classroom, and I'm just going to show you the screen in about 2 seconds so you can see what you got to do. Okay, so right there's my Google Classrooms. You guys would go to Venus and Lunar, and here is the passcode. If you want, you could do the stuff in Google Classrooms instead of the packet for now. You could still do the packet. I'll still give you credit for doing the packet. But if you were going to choose between one or the other and you did the classroom stuff, I would be okay with that. So basically, that's your password, ZCDTHXL. I will type that in. ZC, was it H? I don't remember. I'm old, my memory's not great. CDTHXL. CDCHXL. Okay, and that is the 7th grade one right there. Okay, so that's the 7th grade one. Basically, when you're on there, it all corresponds to what we were doing in class. So there's a material link on there where you can either listen to the play, read the play, or watch the play. There are quizzes for the entire Act 1, Act 1, Scene 4, and Act 1, Scene 5. I would suggest, of course, that you, watch or listen to or read the story before you do those acts. There's also something over conflict types, which I'm going to come back on at 11:30, and that one's primarily for 7th grade, so I'll go over conflict types there. But I posted a video, kind of like at the beginning of class. A lot of times I'll show a video for a few minutes, and you can also watch that video, and it will give you a quick summary of the types. And then for 8th grade, your code is JTXJLCD, and I will type that in also. I know our time's coming up, so I'll try to be quick. Let's see. There you go. And that's 8th grade. And again, 8th grade is very similar. I know time's up, so I really appreciate you guys coming. I hope you're staying safe during the quarantine. And if you guys have any questions, you can either post them in here on Google Classrooms, or I think they gave everybody an email. Thanks. Appreciate it. And I'll see you guys when I see you.